Welcome, Frank Gallagher. Thanks so much for being on Access Co-Leaders to speak into our students from Freire Charter High School. So let's get into it. In 1 to 2 sentences, can you tell us what the FGX Group is doing and what your role is as president?
Sure. So what we do is we focus on helping our clients manage commercial real estate project. More specifically, taking on the task of hiring all the project team members, which are typically architects, engineers, general contractors, and various other vendors such as environmental firms, furniture dealers, IT-related firms, basically anybody that would be involved in a commercial real estate project. And we do a lot of different things, commercial office space, industrial, big box warehouses, self-storage, and then a lot of institutional work, K through 12 higher ed. And our focus really as consultants, owners, reps is to really, focus on helping our clients manage the difficult process from conceptual through move-in and deal with all the daily issues that come up during the project life cycle, and then work, close with the project team members.
Okay, so what I hear is largely coalescing teams, a variety of different people, teams, as well as working with a variety of industries.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so you're kind of the coalescer, is that correct? As president, is that your main job?
That's about it. Our job really is, in addition to everything I mentioned, is really to kind of coordinate everybody, making sure everybody is crystal clear on the roles, and to make the transition as seamless as possible for both the project team members and our client.
Okay, yeah, from start to finish too. And so you're in Philly, right? Where is that where you grew up as well?
So I grew up in the Philadelphia area, mainly in the suburbs, but my parents, originally from the Philadelphia area, Overbrook to be exact. But I've pretty much been in the area my whole life, with the exception of moving around a little bit when I was a kid. But once I got to high school, moved back to the area and been here ever since.
Okay, giving back to the community that raised you.
That's right.
All right, and so let's go back a little bit. In middle school and high school, what was keeping you busy? Were you big academic? Were you already coalescing people around you, or what was keeping you busy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that comes to mind when I get asked that question is really sports. I mean, I've kind of been a sports nut, sports geek, whatever you want to call it, for pretty much my whole life. I've, played sports my whole life. I still play a little bit soccer now whenever I can. Nothing serious, just pick up. But, I grew up pretty much playing soccer, baseball, and basketball. So, certainly in my elementary, middle school, and high school years, I was always busy, playing sports. And if I wasn't doing that, of course, I was at school studying and then, hanging out with friends here and there.
Okay. And I saw you coach your daughter's soccer team now.
So I did. So sadly, she has kind of, not lost interest, but she gained more interest in field hockey. So for the last few years, she's been exclusively playing field hockey. She's a junior now in high school, so she's nearing the end of her field hockey career, at least in high school. She'll probably play club field hockey in college. But yeah, those were great days when I was coaching her, her soccer teams.
Well, what do you think you learned from soccer, or what do you hope your daughter is learning from these team sports that's kind of helping you succeed as president, or will help her succeed in her future presidency?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny you say that, because I use this analogy a lot in what I do, and the importance of, whatever you're doing as a career, whether it's commercial real estate based or anything else, but how team sports really translates well into real life. And more specifically, and I really didn't kind of, match the two together at all in terms of sports and business until after I started working. But the point is, growing up and playing various team sports, you really learn the importance of team approach, right? Hence the name team sports. And what that means really is that it's not about you, it's not about it's about working together as a team to achieve one goal and try to win as much as possible, right? And when you go out into the real world, whether it's commercial real estate or any industry, the same thing kind of applies. It's really working well with, your coworkers to get to a common goal, whether it's, doing a project for a client or internally, doing something, for your company. It's not just about you, it's about working together as a team. And I find that, me personally, I gravitate more towards people that have played sports in the past, because they kind of, know the importance of that. And that's not just about one person, it's about the collective unit. So yeah, it's a great question. And, I like to always mention that every chance I get.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to that so eloquently. And I love that, that you're already thinking about that. You're constantly thinking about that, how much you gained from those experiences, and they're still serving you some decades later. So let's hear from our students. Let's hear what they have for you. Samantha, what's your first question for Mr. Gallagher?
My first question is, I saw you went to Villanova University. Do you feel as though this education was worthwhile?
It was. So Villanova, is a pretty well-known school in the Philadelphia area, and I guess mainly due to the basketball program in the last decade or so, it's really more well-known nationally now. But as it relates to academics, it really gave me the motivation and the challenge to get to where I am today. More specifically, I was a civil engineering degree, and when I graduated, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, which is what I'm doing now in construction management. But Villanova and with a lot of the classes I took really gave me the challenge and the push to give me the drive that I have now in my career, work hard, do the right thing, and work well with others as well. But Villanova definitely gave me the push to where I am today for sure.
Okay, so the university really solidified some habits that are serving you really well every day.
It did. I mean, I think I can speak for just about everybody out there that, you don't want to be complacent. You don't want to, whether you're in elementary school, high school, or college, you don't want to be in a position where, you're doing well, but you're not being pushed. I think, as you grow up in life, whether you're a student or a professional, you always want to challenge yourself. And, certainly if you can get to the right college, university that does that for you, it can only benefit you down the road.
Right. Yeah. So early on, you have somebody pushing you, but later you have to be the one self-driving, pushing yourself, learning those
Absolutely.
habits, getting them instilled, and repeating that to success. All
Absolutely.
right. Tatiana, let's hear from you. What did you have?
I saw a lot of your completed projects on your website. I just wanted to know like the significance around them and like what part did you play in all those projects?
Yeah. So, what we do for our business is a little bit of everything as it relates to commercial project type. So, whether it's office space, corporate space, healthcare related, schools, what have you, we like to do a little bit of everything. So, my role really is to put together project team members, design firms, contractors, and all the other vendors involved, and really, really work with everybody to make sure that, their tasks are, crystal clear so they can carry them out. And, as we go through the entire project process, which is planning, design, construction, and then all the stuff that happens after construction, it's, installing furniture and all the IT related tasks, whether it's phone and internet services or audiovisual and so forth. So it's really, about, me communicating clearly to all the people involved with the project team to kind of, get to the finish line. So my goal really, for the most part, is to communicate effectively and make sure everybody is crystal clear on what they have to do.
Is there one of those commercial sectors that's more difficult that you've noticed for your team or for yourself to manage?
Yeah, good question. I think overall, they all definitely have their challenges, but probably the number one, I guess, in general, challenging market, vertical, so to speak, in the commercial sector is healthcare. Mainly hospitals. So, if you've ever been in a hospital, you see that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of high tech equipment, machinery, etc. So there's a lot that goes on behind the walls, so to speak, when you're renovating or building a new hospital. So depending on what type of hospital it is and what kind of rooms you're designing and building, there's certainly challenges, but some, may be more challenging than most. But overall, the healthcare hospital market project types, I should say, is really probably a little bit more challenging than the rest.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for speaking to kind of the micro that leads to the macro. The details are so important, obviously, in your work and in anything that you're building that's going to be big and deliverable. So, Makai, let's come to you. What did you have next?
After achieving or attaining your civil engineering degree, what was the path to your presidency at the FGX Group?
Yeah, great question. So I was in college in the early 90s, and a lot of folks don't realize this, but in the early 90s, there was a little bit of a recession going on. I graduated in 1994, and unbeknownst to me, the market wasn't that favorable to get a job right away. So it took me, about 6 months after graduation to land my first, professional job, and it was with a construction management company. And that being said, even though I was an engineer by degree, I kind of had started thinking about not necessarily doing design work because I personally enjoy more being out on a job site and, looking at what's going on and learning from the construction workers and kind of observing things that get translated from a set of design drawings to the actual field in place. So I was fortunate that, during my time at Villanova, I wasn't exactly sure that I wanted to do design work, and I was kind of thinking I want to do construction management, but certainly not 100% sure on either. But because of the recession and because of, it took me some time to find a job, I was lucky that I found, the right job, 6 months after I graduated. And I was very fortunate, very blessed, very lucky that first job is still what I'm doing today. A lot of people can't say that, they're doing the same thing because things change, interests change, and things like that. But I was fortunate that my first job was exactly what I wanted to do.
Okay, so yeah, a lot of forces beyond your control were kind of, mitigating factors at that time. But so in that time, did you see this as like a great opportunity, something that you were going to build on, or were you kind of frustrated with all those circumstances?
No, I mean, I honestly didn't know what to expect when I landed my first job, even though I knew that things in the economy weren't great. Fortunately, despite the recession, 1994 was kind of the first year that we were coming out of it. So even though it took me a few months to land my first job, the timing was good because the economy was starting to get better. So the company I worked for at the time was getting busier and busier as time went on. So I was fortunate to be able to grow with that company and eventually get promoted with different tasks within the company. But yeah, the timing, despite what I mentioned about the recession, the timing of which when I landed my first job in 1994 was actually pretty good time in retrospect.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like it was great that you were open to whatever may come, willing to jump in there.
Absolutely.
Skylar, what do you have next?
My question was, what do you think clients value most about working with you?
Great question. Great question. I would think first and foremost is trust, integrity, and honesty. I was fortunate to be brought up in a great household with some great parents, and they try to tell me how to do the right thing, from the time that I was very young. And, as I was growing up, try to surround myself with the right people, the right friends. And, certainly high school and college days, I did all of that. And, certainly it's all about life, and whatever industry you're in, you're going to be, kind of hit with moral challenges, moral decisions here and there. And, I find that due to my positive upbringing, that once I started my company, for me it's the only way to do it. You always do the right thing, you always tell the truth, you always work with people, and have integrity and character, and people remember that. I'm not here to say that every construction project is great. Issues don't happen. Part of my job of what I do is to minimize risk and minimize situations, but the reality is every construction project has its challenges. My job is to identify issues that come up and present solutions to clients. And along the same lines is making sure that you do the right thing. And when you do that, people remember that. And whether they're clients or whether they're architects, engineers, contractors, people remember, hey, that was a challenging project, but Frank is a good guy and did the right thing. I'll remember him for next time. So for me, it's paramount to be trustworthy, tell the truth, have integrity, have good character, and things will fall into places as long as you do those things.
Yeah, great question, Skylar. And I'm guessing those precepts are the same for your leadership, for being president and everybody in-house. The trust, integrity are kind of the forefronts of that leadership.
Absolutely. And when you show that and people get to know you and know that's how you work, the right people gravitate towards you. I mean, I'm not going to say that everybody abides by that all the time, but you kind of weed out the bad apples, so to speak. And I found in time, as long as you align yourself with the right people, good things happen.
All right. Samantha, we're coming back to you. What did you have next?
I noticed you spent some time in Puerto Rico for high school. Do you think that this experience shaped who you are today?
Great question. I do. I'm actually half Latino. I'm half Irish, half Latino, which is kind of a unique combination. And, I say that because, moving to Puerto Rico when I was in sixth grade, I was there from sixth grade to my freshman year in high school. It definitely was somewhat of a culture shock, but because of my Latino heritage, it really wasn't for me. Kind of getting ingrained in the culture and with the Spanish language wasn't a huge deal for me, but I really enjoyed it. And I mentioned me living in Puerto Rico to a lot of people. And I always recommend, hey, if you ever, want a nice little vacation, Puerto Rico is not that far away. Beautiful island, beautiful people. But certainly, Puerto Rico was definitely a very cool place to live. And when I moved back here, when I was a sophomore in high school, I kind of brought with me, the advantage of, being able to say that, hey, I lived, outside the continental United States. I lived in an area where, the native language is Spanish, and you kind of set yourself apart from people when you kind of can say that, and you can bring different ideas and whatnot to people when you kind of have that background. So I always recommend people, hey, if you get the opportunity to travel and go abroad, definitely do it, because there's a lot to see.
Okay, yeah, that multicultural aspect is serving you every day, opening up opportunities, doors, even in your vision and approach to different groups and markets that you have to deal with, I'm guessing.
Agreed.
All right. Tatiana, we're coming back to you.
What led you to where you are in your career now? Like, what are some key things that placed you where you are now in your life?
Yeah, I would say kind of what we were talking about before about, the path I took from being an engineer and things being a little slow when I graduated, and worked for a few different general contractors in commercial construction for the first 16 years of my career. And then the last 16 is what I've been doing for my company. Yeah, I think just, being exposed to different things, different project types, has allowed me to certainly keep interested. I always tell people that, I don't necessarily like just doing the same type of projects. If I was doing all office renovation work or all hospital work or only, warehouse work, I quite frankly would get bored. I enjoy the experiences and the challenges of doing different types of projects. I also like doing fun things, certainly kind of going back to where I mentioned before about, it's always good to be challenged. I always like to challenge myself on, okay, I haven't done this type of project in a while, or I've never done this type of project. Why don't I try to explore the possibility of doing something like that? For me, in the commercial real estate world, there's so many opportunities to do different types of projects. So for me, it's kind of like keeping an eye on other kind of different project types, or going back to, working on projects I haven't worked in a while, because there's, commercial real estate definitely has a wide range of opportunities and whatever you want to do.
Okay. And when you were just starting out, did you have those same luxuries of, finding new things all the time, or choosing which projects you wanted to be involved in?
So certainly not. I mean, so when I started my company, I started my company during the recession in 2010, and we were, say, 12, 18 months into the recession, give or take. And I kind of knew that then what I want to do, what I'm doing now, 16 years later, but it was a challenge because I wasn't alone. There were certainly a lot of other folks that were unemployed or just starting out their businesses like I was. I lost touch with people. I mean, social media, LinkedIn really wasn't a huge thing back in 2010. So just trying to reconnect with people that I hadn't spoken with in a few years was certainly challenging. But I would say, from 2010 to 2013, 2014, first 3 or 4 years of me starting out my business, it was a lot of work. It was, knocking on doors, so to speak, reconnecting with people, meeting people for the first time. What I do a lot now didn't really exist back then, which is a lot of networking. There's certainly a lot of groups that cater towards the commercial real estate space, where you can go and meet up with people. And, some of these events are a couple hundred people. Some of them are a little bit smaller. But the bottom line is that's an opportunity to really kind of show up and either meet people for the first time or reconnect. and kind of have like a laid back conversation. And that's really where relationships are based. Getting to know people is really the kind of the crust of success, and especially in the commercial real estate world, but certainly in other industries. 3 or 4 years into starting my business, it took me that long to really figure out, okay, I need to get out and, find these groups, find these networking events, and not necessarily just always talk about work, right? One thing I did learn is that when you're doing, when you're at networking events and particularly meeting people for the first time, talking about work all the time when you're in a setting that you're not stuck in an office, so to speak, people want to talk about other things, whether it's the upcoming Eagles season or, Phillies home openers on Thursday, right? Kind of talk about different things. And it's a way to get to know people. And kind of going back to, relationships and whatnot. That's how relationships start, is to get to know people. A guy that I met years ago told me once, Frank, you want to do business with people you like. And to get to that point, you have to get to know them. So when you're out and about and you're networking or meeting people for coffee or having lunch with somebody, that's a good way to get to know them a little bit on the personal level. And certainly the first few years was challenging. But once I figured out that, hey, this is what you have to do to get to know people and develop relationships, getting business as a result was certainly a lot easier.
Thanks for speaking to and showing our students on the importance of networking and how much of a foundation that can build for you for your growth over time. And also speaking to when you're starting out, kind of that need to be open to all the opportunities, or maybe not all, but most of the opportunities that present themselves, and just learn to enjoy those and see what you can gain from those and grow from those opportunities versus this is exactly what I'm set to do and thinking it's going to be snap poof there.
Great.
All right, Makai, we're back to you.
It's almost 4 months into the new year. So what are some trends, some global trends that have affected your business, and what's a unique one that some people maybe wouldn't think would affect your business, but it has?
Yeah, good question. So the last 12 to 18 months, although we've definitely seen a little bit more growth in the overall commercial real estate market, namely corporate office, despite what happened in 2020, companies going to working at home. The last few years, companies have kind of realized through data and analysis and whatnot in terms of productivity with their employees that maybe working from home 5 days a week isn't really the way to go. So more often than not, now that we're in 2026, you have a hybrid approach. You have companies dictating to employees, you got to come in 2 or 3 days a week, and then you work from home the remainder of the week. So the last 12 to 18 months certainly have seen more of that. And then in other commercial verticals, whether it's healthcare related or industrial, institutional, things have been picking up as well. Although, not to get into politics, we're certainly challenged in the last year or so in terms of things happening around the world that have certainly affected commercial real estate. Case in point, what's happening in Iran right now, unfortunately, is affecting oil prices. And when you talk about commercial construction, oil prices affects everything. Materials, making materials, transportation, getting materials from one place to a construction site, that's going to rise cost. And when costs go up, then clients tend to be a little hesitant to release construction projects. So there's certainly some challenges so far in 2026 with clients being as comfortable as maybe they were in prior years. But overall, I think the commercial real estate market is still doing well, but it's kind of like certainly not as busy as it was, say, 2 years ago. But I would say that it's still busy enough that, anybody you talk to, whether they're design firms or contractors or what have you, firms that have certainly been around for a while and have good reputations, everyone is busy. A lot of people are still looking to grow their businesses, looking to hire employees. But I would say for the most part, everybody is kind of cautiously optimistic in terms of setting expectations as it relates to serious growth, at least right now. But I would say looking ahead in 2026, I think things are a little bit more positive than they were certainly in the last 12 months. We'll certainly see, but that's what I'm seeing right now.
Okay. And as a leader, is that kind of your job to make everybody feel good, even though there's a lot of circumstances going on that cause a lot of fear? And how do you do that?
Yeah, no, another great question. I mean, it's, there's only so much I can do, right? So my job is to try to keep current, on what's happening in the commercial real estate world as a whole. But for me, it's all about transparency, right? If I have an active project going on and there's things happening that, may be an issue, whether it's budget issues or schedule, whatnot, just to communicate and be transparent with everybody. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what we think is going to happen in the near future. We're going to do this, that, or the other thing as a precaution and just to make sure everybody's on the same page. So it's all about communication and making sure that everybody's kind of, on the same page with everything. But I think it kind of goes back to, the integrity and the character thing, just doing the right things and everything kind of, shakes out after that.
Definitely. Skylar, what did you have next?
So when I received the email, that we were going to be doing this interview, I realized your name kind of like reminded me of a character from a show called Shameless. So I wanted to know what character from a show or a movie best reflects you as a person.
This is by far the best question so far. So yeah, if everybody's familiar with the show Shameless, the main character's name is Frank Gallagher, and he's got like 8 kids or something like that. And it's obviously fictitious, but it's extremely entertaining. So, once that show became more and more popular, I would get this question all the time, especially when I check into restaurants and whatnot, give them my name. I usually get this question. But I would like to say that I'm the complete opposite of the character Frank Gallagher in Shameless. He certainly has his challenges in life. Let me see. I used to get, I don't know if you guys ever watch Friends. I used to get Chandler all the time. And not that I necessarily look like him or as funny as him, but some of my mannerisms apparently mimic him. Certainly when that show was popular in the 90s and early 2000s, I used to get Chandler.
Rest in peace. And yeah,
Yes.
Eileen and I were giggling about Frank Gallagher in the green room. I'm happy you brought it up, Skylar. I was like, I wanted to, but I think I'll avoid that. So happy you went
Thanks for
there.
asking. That's awesome.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and get to know the students. Samantha, or just so you know, Frank, they're all seniors, so they're going to be stepping into their future pathways, their careers, university. So we'll just guide them a little bit with any of your experience as they step into these new pursuits. Samantha is interested in business and thinks she wants to open a bookstore. But Samantha, if you want to speak to that a little bit more.
I do want to open my business, and I chose a bookstore because I have had a passion for reading since I was really young. So I just wanted to incorporate that into my future career.
And Samantha, you're already taking some courses and preparing for that, right?
Yes, I'm taking a course at CCP currently.
Okay. So Frank, what advice do you have for her as she kind of steps into these decisions about where she'll do her schooling, as well as any advice on owning and running a business?
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations on that goal, first of all. Yeah, I mean, listen, starting your own business, probably sounds, scary when you first kind of think about doing it and doing some research on what it takes. But, once you kind of get into it a little bit, it's really not that difficult. And there's certainly a lot of steps involved, research you have to do to make sure you're in the right location and, size of the bookstore you're looking to have, making sure that, figure that out too. But as far as owning your business, I mean, first and foremost, it's so rewarding. You don't mind working the long hours because it's your baby. You love what you do, and you kind of put in the time, and it doesn't seem like you're working. Because if you're starting your own business, more often than not, you're doing it because you truly enjoy doing it, and it's not really work, if that makes sense. But yeah, I love hearing, folks looking to start their businesses, whatever, that may be. And, my advice to you is definitely go for it.
Right. Sam, is that kind of speaking to your vision of how it would all go?
Yeah, I kind of knew that starting a business is not the easiest thing in the world, but it's also just something I'm really passionate about. So I'm not like afraid to take on the challenge.
We love that. Fearlessness. Thanks so much for sharing. Tatiana, let's hear from you. She is interested in psychology and what motivates people. So I'm sure you have to think about that a lot in your work. Tatiana, if you want to speak to that a little bit more.
I really did want to go to college to study psychology to become a therapist. And that's kind of like all I'm looking forward to. I do want to be able to like eventually have my own little office to be able to like have people come to me directly, but that's just not something that is in my fronts right now. I just want to start off with just just flat out just becoming a therapist or just being a help to people with the degree I'm working on to get.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I definitely don't profess to know everything about, schools and therapists and what they do, on a daily basis. But I know a little bit about it because my daughter, who is 17, and she's a junior in high school now, is very interested in studying psychology as well. So her mother and I are in the process of looking at colleges and identifying colleges, universities that, are good for psychology or psychiatry programs. Right now, we're certainly at a time where psychiatrists and psychologists and therapists and what have you are probably more in demand now than they have been in a long time. And a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and what the pandemic has done to all of us, right? I mean, for us being kind of cooped up in our homes for most of, if not 2020 and then 2021, we started, being able to sneak out of the house once in a while safely. That was hard on all of us, and I don't think most of us realized it at the time, and I certainly did not. But therapy is so important for that reason, as well as a multitude of other reasons. And I would say, as I get older in life and we kind of start to think about well-being and the importance of having a clear head, it's important to kind of take care of yourself. And to that point, therapists will always be required. I would say I would put psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists in a bucket along with, barber shops and restaurants, where those are the type of industries to be in that will probably never slow down, whatever happens in the world. If we have another pandemic, if we have another recession, those are the type of things that will always be busy. There's always going to be a need for those type of things.
Awesome. What do you think of that advice, Tatiana?
I really do like the advice that he gave because he identified that the career that I want to follow is something that's really never going to decrease. So I always have an opportunity, always be able to slip in somewhere. Like I understand that it's not going to be super easy for me to just pop right in, but it's something that I'll have an opportunity anywhere I am in life or any part of, the area I am. So knowing that I do have these opportunities anywhere because it's such a high demand thing is definitely motivating to keep me going. So I'll be able to keep the cycle rolling.
That's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
And
Yeah,
it's just rewarding that you're going to be able to help people too. That's great.
Frank, can you speak a little bit to staying motivated through the ups and downs, as I'm sure she'll experience in this career path?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, especially if you're an entrepreneur like myself, or you and your business, or both, it's important to kind of stay positive because there's definitely going to be peaks and valleys, ups and downs. There's certainly times, throughout each year where I'm going nuts and almost working too much, and I try to slow down and really kind of look at the importance of work-life balance. And there's times where, I'm not as busy as I should be. And, but those are certainly the times you have to stay positive. So I think overall, if you have a clear head and you just stay positive, whether you're too busy or not busy enough, is really the way to go. Because, as long as you're doing the right things, going back to integrity and trust, things will come back to help you, even, during times where things might be slow. I think, I know some days it's hard to do this, but as long as you stay positive as much as you can, things tend to fall into place for you.
All right. Love that. Love that. All right, Mikhail, we're coming to you. He is interested in engineering, mechanical engineering specifically, and has hopes of helping the DoD someday. So, Mikhail, you can jump in and speak to your pathway pursuits a little bit more.
My main reason for going into mechanical engineering is that I want to make something tangible, and I also want to make something that has an impact on the world, hopefully positively. I really want to go out there and make something that's tangible. I can see it work. I can see how successful it is, and I can get that warm feeling of confidence.
How is that his feeling about his career path? Do you think that'll carry him far?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, I took a handful of mechanical engineering courses. As I mentioned before, I was a civil engineer, but I could definitely say that the mechanical engineering curriculum was definitely a little bit more difficult than the civil. But I found some of the mechanical classes I took were quite frankly a little bit more interesting. I mean, civil engineering, I loved, taking the classes and I'm proud to have the degree. But for the most part, civil tends to be a little bit more boring than maybe some of the other engineering disciplines. But mechanical, as I mentioned, certainly, the classes I took at least, were certainly a little bit more exciting than some of the civil classes. And as you mentioned, you have in mechanical engineering, you have things, moving around, dynamic, parts and pieces put together, seeing how things work together. Whereas civil, it's a little bit more, kind of static, so to speak. But, there's certainly so many opportunities, for mechanical engineers, whether you want to do design work or project management work. If you want to design, mechanical systems within buildings, or, any other type of structure, there's certainly a lot of options out there with a mechanical engineering degree. And if you're, talking about working for the Department of Defense, obviously that would be a place you'll probably never get bored and will always, be employed. They certainly need people like you to kind of, keep them going. So definitely would recommend the DoD for sure.
Awesome. Makai, what do you think of that advice?
Very motivational, very, very inspiring in a way. But I had a follow-up question. Tying mechanical engineering and civil engineering, it's very similar, as you said, in a way, curriculum wise. But you are a project manager, you do construction work. So how does seeing your tangible projects, feeling it, touching it, seeing it rise up from the foundation, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, so, one of the things that, my clients like about my background is kind of what you just alluded to is, not only my civil engineering degree, but, working for a general contractor and really kind of getting in the weeds, so to speak, when it comes to managing subcontractors, whether it's been mechanical contractors, electrical, carpenters and so forth. But the one advantage I do have in having an engineering degree, even though I don't practice it or I don't work for an engineering firm, is that, when I am working with project team members, namely the engineering team, and, they're talking the engineering language, I understand it, right? Now, I certainly don't understand everything. And, obviously the engineering teams that I work for know much more about design work than I do. But because of my background, I'm able to kind of follow it, for the most part and understand where they're coming from, when we're on conference calls or, I'm looking at drawings or what have you. And obviously, if I don't know, the answer to some things, I certainly ask the question. But, kind of having the engineering degree certainly translates well into construction management because, when you're doing construction management, you have no choice but at some point to be exposed to engineers, whether it's during the design process or if you're on the construction side, understanding, the drawings and understanding how the engineer kind of came up with their design. So having that background as an engineer is certainly advantageous for sure.
All right. Thank you for that incredible, well-tailored advice for you, Makai. I'll ask you one more thing for Makai. Can you empower him a little bit as he steps into these really difficult mechanical engineering classes? Like, how did you get through it, or how do you recommend where can he lean to successfully get through those courses?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would definitely say that the mechanical courses, I find the ones I took at least, and I have some friends that went through the mechanical engineering curriculum. It certainly sounds like they were a lot more interesting than civil. Like I said, I mean, civil in general tends to be a little bit more boring as terms of, what exactly you're designing and whatnot. Although I personally found a little bit more interesting just because, growing up, when I was a kid, I played with Legos and Tinker Toys and things like that. So I always like building things. So for me, with the civil curriculum, whether for the most part, the structural engineering classes really appeal to me for sure. But with the mechanical engineering stuff, I always found it just more fascinating and more fun and more interesting. So I think as you go through the curriculum, you're taking your classes, you're certainly going to find some stuff that might be, more challenging than most. But I think it's going to pique your interest. And, when you're interested and things become a little bit more fun, so to speak, on figuring out how things are put together and how the mechanics of certain things work, you're going to do well because it's going to keep your interest, if that makes sense. With the
All
civil
right.
stuff, I don't find it as interesting. The mechanical, and I'll put electrical and chemical in this bucket too. Between mechanical, electrical, and chemical, there's a lot of fascinating things when you're taking those courses in those engineering disciplines. The mechanical certainly is one of those three. So I think, just taking those classes alone is going to pique your interest and keep you engaged. And as a result, I'm sure you're going to do very
All right. So that intrigue will carry you through. Makai really enjoyed building paper planes and origami. He shared with us previously. So kind of the same as you, but I think the intrigue will carry Tatiana through as well in her psychology coursework and motivations about learning more about the human mind and the people around her. So applicable all around there. Skylar, we're coming over to you. Also a senior, as I mentioned, and she is interested in fashion. But Skylar, can you speak to that a little bit more?
I'm interested in fashion and a lot of other things that, require creativity, but I'm going to go to school for nursing. So I was thinking about whether I should commit to a school and just go there or do 2 years of CCP, then transfer to a school. And I was wondering how I could, possibly incorporate, fashion, interior designing into, my interests later on in life.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably suggest if you're, really thinking about getting into a nursing program and then eventually transitioning into, some type of interior design or fashion, maybe look at a college or university that obviously has both. And there's certainly a lot of those type of institutions in this area, whether it's, within Philadelphia or outside the city, or even a few hours, in either direction. Certainly, in the greater mid-Atlantic area, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, down to Maryland, and even in the Carolinas, there's so many opportunities with different colleges. And as I mentioned before, my daughter is in the process of, looking to apply to schools. So I've kind of learned, some of the schools out there that have the different types of programs, but it seems like we have a lot of opportunities within the greater Philadelphia area for colleges, universities that have a little bit of both. And listen, in the grand scheme of things, if you decide to go, somewhere and, you're going through the nursing program and you decide, what, maybe I do want to transfer, there's nothing wrong with that either. But in a whole, as a whole, I should say, there's definitely a lot of institutions that have good programs for both nursing and interior design and fashion that you can certainly target.
Yeah, Skylar, can you speak a little bit more to how you got to nursing or, why you're kind of considering leaving the fashion piece behind or not having it be the predominant goal?
Well, it's never really like, the main goal. It's just something that I wanted to do on the side because, nursing, would make me money. And, ever since I was younger, I kind of wanted to be a nurse because, I look up to my mom a lot and she's a nurse. So, but I just wanted to know what I could, how I could involve that later on in life with, still focusing on nursing.
Okay. Frank, I know you do a lot of like giving back and you kind of work a lot with a nonprofit on the side. Can you talk a little bit about that balance, balancing your passion with your profession?
Not to get into some other stuff I'm involved with, but I certainly think that in general, as you grow professionally, it's always important to kind of, not lose focus on things you're passionate about. In your case, it's the fashion stuff. So I have things that I kind of, try to, keep an eye on, whether it's giving back and doing volunteer work and things like that. But, I would say, and this is kind of a statement for everybody on the call here, as long as you're out there and you're talking to people and just put yourself out there as much as you can, because, the world is a small one and you just never know who you're going to run into. As you're going through your nursing program on whichever college or university you're at, just keep an open mind that, put yourself out there, whether it's, getting internships at different companies, just taking a walk outside, walking down Philadelphia and going to a coffee shop and overhearing conversations. You just never know where your next opportunity is going to come from. Meet as many people as you can. And, you'll be amazed where your next opportunity can come from for sure.
Right, great advice, and thanks for sharing, Skylar. Looking forward to your line of scrubs or line of footwear. I know how important that is for nurses, so we'll be looking forward to seeing that come out to accompany your nursing career. Oh, Samantha, we're coming back to you. What did you pick up from today's conversation, or what most resonated with you?
What most resonated with me was when he said, do business with people you like. And the way to do that is by networking. And this resonated with me because it highlights the importance of networking for the success in your career and just life in general.
Beautiful. All right,
Amen.
Tatiana. All right. What's something that made you feel like the future is more possible today?
When we were talking about my career and me wanting to be a psychologist, I definitely have a lot of opportunities, and it's a part of the world that will never fail. It's an ongoing wheel, and there's so many things that I can do within that circle that I'll be able to, like in this industry, I'll be able to find a place where I can stick and create a difference there. So I thought that that was very strong and a piece that I can carry on with myself.
I love that. Love that, Frank. I bet you're feeling good, feeling how much your words have already had an impact on our students here today.
Absolutely. It's great to hear.
All right. Makai, what's one thing you're thinking about differently after today's session?
I did some research, so I knew that the mechanical engineering curriculum would be a bit rigorous in a way. But I like Mr. Gallagher's description of it. It's very unique. It's very intriguing. It'll keep me focused. It'll keep me on my toes. So that lowers the, I guess, I don't want to say the fear, but that lowers the fear of it being too much.
All right. Help that subside a little bit and you feel stronger, a little bit more confident jumping into that next year here. Frank, we are in our final minutes with our students from Freire Charter High School. Do you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say stay positive. There's so much opportunity for everybody out there, whatever you want to do. And as I just mentioned before, I mean, I think the key is just branching out as much as you can, reaching out to people, asking questions. Asking questions is so underrated, I think. I think the people that you align yourself with, if they see that you're interested and you ask questions, they know that you're maybe more genuine than others. But just put yourself out there and meet as many people as you can, and you'll find the right people to align yourself.
All right, so keep networking just like you're doing here today on
Sure.
Access Co-Leaders. Frank Gallagher from the FGX Group, thank you so much for being on with our students from Freire Charter High School. And thank you to my co-hosts, Samantha, Tatiana, Makai, and Skylar. You've been listening to Access Co-Leaders. We'll see you next time.